A lot has happened in the last week. It seems like every day a lot is happening in relationship to the ongoing trade dispute between China and the United States. And one of the stated goals of these tariffs by Donald Trump and his team is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. And that's what I want to talk about, but let's first kind of hit on the highlights. It seems that Trump has realized how bad the United States consumers are going to be hit. So he's kind of backtracked, he's kind of flip-flopped on the whole tariff things. He had different people coming out saying different things. There was an interview with him saying that, China's going to love us. We're going to make a great deal with China. Things are great. China's great. We love China, which was a complete flip-flop on his hard stance saying that China's been ripping off the United States and that China has been doing all these bad things and unfair trade deals. And a lot of this, I think, had to do with the CEOs of Walmart and Target and a couple of these bigger retail stores went and had a meeting with him last, I think, Wednesday, around Tuesday or Wednesday. They had a meeting with him and told him, hey, we're going to run out of stuff because we ship a lot of our products from China. That's where it's manufactured. And it's then shipped over to the United States. And they're going to run out of stuff on their shelves. I was talking about this in a previous video. It's something like 70% of all the products in Walmart are from China. Even if the final brand or the final made-in sticker says the United States, most of the components are coming from China. And that's what I want to talk about in a second, because the United States has stated that it wants to bring manufacturing jobs back, and I just don't think it's possible. I'm going to explain why I think it's pretty difficult to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, and I'm even going to give an example of why it's so difficult, because there has been a company that has tried to move manufacturing out of China, and they've had a very difficult time, and it'll be for the reasons that I explain. This was, one of the stated goals is to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and it just won't happen. So the first reason is skill. And a lot of people, when they talk about China and talk about manufacturing in China, they don't actually talk about the skills that have been built up over the last 40 years. They talk about cheap labor. And that was true in maybe the 1980s, 90s, and maybe even the early 2000s. That was true. That many companies went to China because it was cheaper. And the reason it was cheaper at the beginning was because of the labor, but it became cheaper to manufacture in China over time because of expertise. And so what I mean is, you can't take that 40 years of experience and put it into the United States and expect it to work. And what I mean by that is Chinese factories have been operating for many, many years now, as we know, and every day they're learning new things. And every day they're getting better at their jobs, and they're training new employees in the ways that they know and with the skills that they know. You could take a factory, let's say any factory, from Shenzhen, and you could build that factory exactly the same in, say, Texas, somewhere, Austin, Texas. And you would have the same factory, but you wouldn't have the expertise. And what I mean by that is you wouldn't have the skilled labor. And so when the whole proposition at the beginning was we're taking our manufacturing to China because it's cheaper, and it was cheaper, right? There was people working in what would be considered sweatshop conditions. We had plenty of videos from it, and that was, the 80s and maybe into the 90s. But in the 2000s, especially when they entered the WTO, things started to change because they were required to change by law. And what they had built was 20 years of experience. We go now another 20 years, they have 40 years of experience in manufacturing. So even if you were to take that same exact plant from Shenzhen or wherever in China and put it into, Texas or Florida or California, you would not be able to manufacture the same product. It just would not be possible because you don't have the skills. So the first thing is the United States workforce is not capable of doing the jobs that the Chinese are specialized in. And so if you wanted to move your manufacturing to another country or to the United States, you could move the facility, but you can't move the workers. You can't move the experience. And that's what I think the Trump administration doesn't understand. And a good example, because I said I'd give you an example, is iPhones and Apple tried to do this. And they've been trying to do this actually for a few years now. I remember back probably 2016, 17, when the first trade war was kind of starting. Apple was producing most of their phones in China. It was something like 90% of their phones were produced in China. I'd have to look it up, but it was something ridiculous. Like almost all their phones were being produced in China. And they were getting the last couple of screws in the United States to be so they could claim it was made in the United States. But the entire process was being done in China. And when the first trade war happened, I think that was 2017-18, that time, when Trump first started this, China was hit with tariffs, right? That was the whole first round. And Apple said, hey, we're pretty much reliant on China for our product. Maybe we should look to set up manufacturing in other countries. And so they did, and they looked at India. They said, how about India? India is a democracy, it has a large population. Why can't we just take our manufacturing from China to India? And they went down that path. And they've been going down that path for almost 10 years now. And they are still struggling with all the skilled labor, and they're struggling with the second thing that I want to talk about, which is supply chain. So the first reason they've been struggling in India is because they don't have the skilled labor. They just don't have the people that are trained to build phones, whether it's an iPhone or Samsung or any other phone out there. It's coming from China because those are skilled employees and they have the tooling, they have the manufacturing, they have everything set up so that it works. And the other thing that they have set up is the supply chain. So even if you wanted to take everything from China, if you wanted to take all your manufacturing from China and say, let's put it in India, let's put it in the United States, let's put it in another country, it would be extremely difficult to do because the way that China keeps costs low is through the supply chain. Everything is made in China, so it's very easy to create all the components in all the factories that surround the iPhone factory, so to say. So Foxconn or wherever they make iPhones now would be the final assembly, but all those parts had to come in from somewhere, and they're coming in from all the satellite manufacturing around it. So there's another factory down the road that's making just screens, or just the plastic casing, or just one, component of the iPhone. And so even if they say, let's manufacture the iPhone in India or the United States, you still have to have all those satellite manufacturing companies that supply the parts. And that's why it doesn't make any sense, because unless you're going to create an entire ecosystem in the United States around manufacturing, like China has done in Shenzhen and in other parts of China, then you're still going to be importing most of your parts from China. And then it gets expensive because you're going to have to ship all those parts, every single individual part, to Texas, and then assemble it in Texas, which makes no sense. So the reason China is so cheap now is because the supply chain is completely integrated in China, and they have the skilled labor, and the cost of living isn't crazy like in other parts of the world, especially the United States. So there are all these components that are making up an ecosystem that has been built over the last 40 years in China that the United States, India, anywhere else in the world doesn't have it. So there are whole cities like Yiwu that is like known for the Christmas city, and they make something like 90% of all the Christmas ornaments that go, around the world, to Europe, to the United States, to Canada, to Australia, wherever people celebrate Christmas. I think most of it's the United States, because the United States is the country that, celebrates it the most in terms of like lights and decorations and Christmas trees and stuff like that. But even if you wanted to take something like a fake Christmas tree manufacturing out of Yiwu and say, let's drop it into Mississippi somewhere, you would still need to get all the plastic. Whether it's recycled plastic or virgin plastic, you would still have to get the plastic. And you would still have to have, individuals who actually understand the process of the machines that they're working with and which steps you take in order to make a fake plastic tree. And you could take the factory and put it in Mississippi, but you'd still have to import all the plastic. You would still have to hire and train employees. And that could take years before you had a functioning manufacturing plant of something as simple as, say, plastic trees. And you would still have to pay probably more for your employees. So there is still too many factors that are keeping manufacturing where it is. There's a reason people go to China specifically for higher end goods now in terms of like electronics, because the textiles and stuff have all moved out of China. And I think people have this idea that China is only operating on like kind of the lowest manufacturing, like the simplest stuff, that they're really just putting a couple of screws into something and then trying to sell it to the United States, when in fact they have moved up the supply chain from the base level all the way up to where, if you're in China, they are producing, I would say, technology that is on par or better than most of the technology that is being imported into the United States. So if you look at cell phones, they have all their own brands, from Xiaomi to Oppo to Huawei to a bunch of other, like, even smaller brands. Those are kind of the big ones. But they are producing technology that is just as good, if not better, in many cases, than the United States. And they've moved up that value chain. If we look at things like EVs, they're now the largest producer of EVs, and that is not simple manufacturing. So even if you were to move your plant from China, let's say Tesla, for example, is like, oh, we just opened our mega factory in Shanghai, but we are deciding, based on all the tariffs and everything going on, we're going to try and remove it and rebuild it in the United States. Sure, you could do it, but then you're still going to have all that training, and that's going to take years of time to set that up. And that's what China has done. They've set up all of these manufacturing bases, essentially, around the country over the last 40 years. That's why most of the sneakers, there's a shoe town, I don't know the name of it, but there's a place that produces like something like 70% of the world's sneakers come from like one town, and the entire town is designed to produce sneakers. They basically have produced entire cities with hundreds of thousands or even millions of people all operating in one sector doing one thing, whether it's sneakers, whether it's Christmas decorations, whether it's like high tech in Shenzhen and like electronics. They have basically designed entire cities around manufacturing and manufacturing a specific thing. And you just can't do that in the United States. You don't have the skilled labor. You don't have the years and years of expertise that have been built. The other thing that people don't talk about is, because China has been building all of these technologies and all of these processes, they've patented a lot of it. So even if you wanted to use the same technology that China is using in its factories, you'd have to then license it because it's patented. So all of this is it's all a nightmare when you think about the logistics of bringing back manufacturing to the United States. On top of that, I was reading a report or saw a news article that was saying that there are more tourism jobs in the United States than there are manufacturing, because they were talking about right now tourism is plummeting in the United States because everybody's scared to go there because they might get stopped at the border. And so they're saying these 12 million jobs that are in the tourism sector are going to go away because nobody's coming anymore. Nobody's coming to Disney World. Nobody's coming to Florida for the beaches. Nobody's going to the Grand Canyon because people that normally would come are being told by their governments not to go to the United States because it is unsafe right now. You might get stopped at the border, your phone might get searched, you might get searched, you might be held in a detention center. And so the United States, trying to recover this lost air, there was a period in time where it made sense and the United States did really well in manufacturing, but they moved on. They went into other segments of the economy that made more money, that had better jobs, that was higher up in the value chain, so to say, that you don't need to have all the problems that comes with manufacturing. And another example that I've been mulling over in my head is there is a lot of pollution involved in manufacturing. And there was famous ads from the 1970s of, it was an Italian guy looking like an Indian crying by the side of the freeway because there was so much pollution and there was so much, so much pollution in the United States. And that was like at the height of the United States manufacturing was during that period when there was a lot of pollution. I lived through the air apocalypse in Beijing, where you couldn't see I wouldn't be able to see the camera where it's sitting because there was just so much pollution. You couldn't see 4 or 5 meters in front of you. It was just gray. There was nothing. There'd be a stoplight, but you wouldn't be able to see it. I lived through that. There was days where everything was shut down and canceled because there was so much pollution. The United States doesn't need or want manufacturing. They're living in a fantasy if they think that that is the type of jobs that they're craving or needing. On top of that, the United States unemployment rate is something like 3 or 4% now. Like the latest numbers, I think, was like 4.5%. I'd have to look it up, but it's very low unemployment, which means that most people in the United States are employed. So where are you even going to get the employees to do the manufacturing? It's beyond belief at this point that you are going to disrupt your entire economy. You're going to crash your stock markets, hoping to recover 10 or 15 million jobs that nobody even really wants. And in doing that, you're going to have a whole bunch of other jobs be lost, like tourism and a bunch of other jobs are going to be lost because you're going on to, like, small businesses are being destroyed right now because you're going down this path of trying to recover something that doesn't need to be recovered. And people might say, oh, well, national security. And I say, BS, because if a war broke out, we saw during World War I and World War II that you can retool very quickly if there is a national emergency. If you actually need to, you can. And besides, we shouldn't be thinking along those lines. We should be thinking on how do we progress past war as a species. Like, we don't need to be engaging in that, in this national security concerns that they hide behind in order to do things like pass tariffs or impose tariffs. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it's beyond belief at this point. And I don't know, I'm rambling because there's a lot of thoughts in my head, but to me, I think that the two big things is you don't have the skilled employees in the United States, and you don't have the supply chain set up to where you could actually compete internationally for manufacturing. China has done it for the last 40 years, and even China has moved away from some of the lower end manufacturing and have started to outsource that to Cambodia and Bangladesh and countries that are coming up also. And they need those jobs because that's how it starts. You start with the lowest, you build the expertise, and you move up the supply chain. The United States has done that also. It's moved up the supply chain to where it no longer needs manufacturing jobs, and to try to reclaim or recapture those jobs doesn't make a lot of sense. At least to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I feel this policy is obviously failing because it's clear it's failing, but also I think it will continue to fail as time goes on because it doesn't make any economic sense at all. But anyways, that was just my thoughts about why I don't think manufacturing is going to come back to the United States. Leave a comment below. What are some of the things that I missed? Obviously, there are other factors other than the skilled labor and supply chain. I think those are the two biggest ones, but I'm sure some of you might have more expertise in manufacturing or might have other ideas and thoughts about why manufacturing won't come back to the United States, things that I've overlooked. I'd love to hear your comments. Love to read your comments, and I will see you in the next video.